project will look a little bit familiar if you've taken the beginning C# class from me, or probably any other programming class from me, because I think it's important that programmers understand binary to decimal to hex and what those values are and how to convert between them. And so this project is the binary calculator that you may have seen in other courses with me. And in this version for .NET MAUI, we're going to use some switches. And we're going to use switches to turn the bits of a byte on or off. So either a value of 1 or 0, and those 8 bits, of course, has a range between 0 and 255. And then we're also going to get a little more practice in using a slider, and then we can set a slider value from 0 to 255 and have it change the bits that way. So I want to be able to enter the bits, see the decimal value and the hexadecimal value, which is just underneath that, kind of small, and then use the slider to go from decimal to binary and hex. 2 buttons here, one that will set all 8 bits to 0 and one that sets all 8 bits to 1. And that, of course, if they're all 1, the value is 255. If they're all 0, the value is 0 decimal. So that's our assignment. We will utilize the switch views to gather user input. We get add a practice slider view, use nested horizontal stack and a vertical stack layout views to organize the XML, practice forcing a landscape orientation, and programmatically we're going to change the value of the switch as well as its thumb color based on the value property. So what I mean by that is if the switch is on, the thumb should be orange, and if it's off, it should be black. And then we also want to code our labels here for the background to be either yellow if it's 1 or green, kind of a lime color if it's 0. So there's some visual interaction here on which bits are set and which aren't. All of the switches will use the same event handler. And so when we click the buttons to go all 0, all 1, this is going to change the switches, which will calculate everything else. So as those switches change value, it's going to do our calculations. You can use the toString with a string of x2 to convert a integer value to hexadecimal with 2 digits. And then I laid this out so that basically we have a scroll view, and inside that scroll view is a vertical stack layout. Inside that is a horizontal stack layout at the top, which consists of 8 vertical stack layouts for our different 8 bits, each one having a little label as far as the value of that bit, 0 or 1, and then the switch. Then we have another vertical stack layout for our decimal equivalency, and that also contains a horizontal stack layout which has our equal sign as a label and then the label for the decimal value. Below that we have another horizontal stack layout with our 2 buttons, and then a vertical stack layout which contains a horizontal stack layout for our slider with the 2 values at each end, and another horizontal stack layout with the value of that slider and then a button to convert that value to our binary and then finally some test data that you can use to make sure everything works. Let me do a live demonstration in a Samsung S20 emulator. Here's our switches. We can change the different bit values. One of the sample tests I gave you, 101001110, which is 166 decimal, and that's an A6 hexadecimal. We can set everything to 0. We can set everything to 1, which is 255. We can take our slider. Let's do a value of 204. Click Convert to Decimal, and we get the bits of 11001100, and our hex is CC. What I'd like you to do at this point is pause the video here, try this on your own, and if you have problems, get stuck, come back and look at my code review, which will follow, and I'll walk you through both the XAML and the C# code that I created. Here's my XAML code. We've got our content page. I gave it a title of binary calculator, used a scroll view with a vertical stack layout inside of that, spacing set to 10. I set my padding to 20 on the left and right, and then vertical options center. So then I have a horizontal stack layout. This is going to be the top half of our user interface. It contains then a vertical stack layout for that 128 bit, and I put some comments in here. So I have a little label, it's going to say 128, and then the label named LBL bit 128 is going to be that a large label containing either a 0 or a 1. I'm going to start it out being 0. I centered the text horizontally, gave it a width request of 60, font size of 60. I set it initially to pale green. That's going to be my green color. Text color to black, font attributes bold. So it'll contain either a 0 or 1. And then we have our switch, which I named switch 128. I'm going to set the toggled value to false, so is toggled equals false. It's going to have a toggled event called update byte. That's going to be the same for all 8 switches. And then my thumb color is black. Now there's an on color property that can change the color of the switch if it's on or off. I found that to be buggy in iOS, so that's why I used the thumb color for my visual color cue to be either orange or black of that thumb, whether it was on or off. And my vertical stack layout, and then I just copied and pasted for the 64-bit. And all I did was change the text to 64 for that label, change the name of the label to LBL bit 64, and set the name of the switch to switch 64. Everything else is the same. Do the same thing for the 32-bit text, label name, switch name. Our 16-bit, again changing those 3 values. Our 8-bit, 4-bit vertical stack layout, 2-bit vertical stack layout, and then finally our 1-bit vertical stack layout. Then I have another vertical stack layout, which is going to be our decimal expression. It's going to have a label. It just simply says decimal equivalent at the top. It's small, made it gray. And then a horizontal stack layout that's containing a label with a large equals, so font size 55, and then a label named LBL decimal that's going to display the decimal value of the byte. Give it a width request of 150, font size of 60, vertical options of center, and the background color I made light gray. Now, normally I like to have my text alignment to the end for numeric values, but in this case it made sense to make it centered. We're not aligning this to a series of values like we did in the Gloria's Express project. We had a bunch of currency values for subtotal, tax, and total. We want those to be right aligned. It makes sense here to have this centered. That ends my horizontal stack layout, and then another label which is going to be our named LBL hex, and it's going to show the hexadecimal value with a pound sign and our 2 digits. And I made that small. Our second row is going to consist of a horizontal stack layout with our 2 buttons. So setting all to 0 and all to 1, and those are calling events of all off and all on. Then I did a border with a stroke thickness of 3 and a padding of 5 that contains a vertical stack layout with a margin of 5. And inside that is our label. It says select a decimal value. And then a horizontal stack layout of our slider preceded by a label of 0, and then at the end to the right a label of 255. I made the width request that slider be 256, so it's easy to select a value between 0 and 255. And it's going to have a value changed event of show decimal. Of course, the minimum is 0, the maximum is 255. And I made both the minimum track color and the maximum track color the same, and they're both red. And then a horizontal stack layout below that, which is going to give us our label to show what the value is of the slider. I named that LBL decimal to set. And then a button, which has a text to convert decimal to binary. It's handling a clicked event with the convert decimal to binary handler. Ending my stacks and ending the scroll view. That's our XAML. Let's take a look at the C#. So in the C#, I set a global integer variable called byte value, gave it a value of 0 to start with. And then here's our update byte. We're going to set the byte value equal to 0, and then I created an array of switches of those 8 switches, switch 128, switch 64, and so forth down to switch 1. I created an array of the labels corresponding to the switches of LBL bit 128, LBL bit 64, down to LBL bit 1. And then my integer values is also an array of 128, 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, and 1. That should be reminiscent of what we did with the steppers in the Gloria's Express project. I'm simply going to iterate through all of the elements of those 3 arrays. So I'm going from 1 to 7. And we're going to set the label of each index to either 1 or 0 if the switch of that index is toggled or not. I'm using a ternary format for that. You could use an if-else. Then I'm going to set the label's background color to either yellow or pale green based on, again, whether that switch is toggled or not. Then I'm going to set the thumb color of the switch to either orange or black based, again, on whether that switch is toggled or not. And then finally I want to add to the byte value a value of index I from our values array or 0, adding that to byte value based, again, whether the switch is toggled or not. I'm going to take the text of our LVL decimal label and set it to the byte value as a string. And the same thing with the hex. We're going to set it a literal string of hexadecimal colon space hashtag, and then concatenate the hex value, 2 digits, of the byte value to a string. Our slider is using a show decimal handler when the value is changing of the slider, and all we're doing is basically getting the value and setting the text of that LVL decimal to set. And then that convert button is going to use our arrays again and simply cycle through and set the bits, which will in turn call our update byte method and calculate everything. The all off and all on are calling another method called set switches, and I'm passing a Boolean value either false or true, and it's simply setting all the switches from this array to the Boolean value that's being passed, either true or false. And that in turn then will call that update byte method and recalculate the decimal and the hexadecimal values. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the .NET MAUI Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.